Hello, friends. And how are you, my friends? I'm LD Madeira, and welcome to another episode of Improv and Magic, the show where I get to talk to my favorite improvisers and magicians. Today, I am fortunate to have on the show the incredibly talented Bill Chott. Bill Chott is an amazing actor and comedian who's been a prominent figure in the world of comedy and theater for over 2 decades. He honed his improv skills in Chicago at Comedy Sports, I.O. Theater, and at Second City, where his contemporaries included Steve Carell, Stephen Colbert, Amy Poehler, and Tina Fey. In 1995, he made his television debut on The Dana Carvey Show, where his most lasting contribution was as the announcer for the animated short series The Ambiguously Gay Duo, which was later featured on Saturday Night Live. Bill has since made other television appearances on many other shows, like Third Rock from the Sun, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, This Is Us, and Young Sheldon, among many others. Of course, he's also known for his role as Mr. Laritate on the Disney Channel's Wizards of Waverly Place, performing alongside Selena Gomez. If you're a Lucille Ball fan, you will recognize him from his award-winning portrayal as Fred Mertz in I Love Lucy live on stage. Bill continues to teach improvisational comedy through his school, the Improv Trick. Bill was such a delight to talk to. He was very friendly and open to talking about his journey. There's so many great takeaways from this interview that I hope you will all enjoy. So, let's begin, shall we? Here's my guest, Bill Chott. My friends, I am so excited to welcome here on Improv and Magic. He's an amazing guy with so much talent and so much experience. He's the amazing Mr. Bill Chott. Hi, Bill. How are you doing today?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I know that you've been pretty busy, so I'm glad that you've been able to fit this into your schedule.
Yeah, I was in the middle of doing laundry and everything today, so.
Which can be time-consuming at times.
It can, especially if you're ADHD, like myself. So it's one of those top-tier tasks. It's like, oh my gosh, there's multiple steps to it. I have to wash, then I have to dry, then I have to put it away, and God forbid you have to separate it beforehand. So,
how's your summer been so far?
It has been hot. Here in Los Angeles, we had, I'm sure it's been a lot hotter in different parts of the country, I've heard. But, we were up in the triple digits for a lot of the last couple months. And I'm glad it cooled down, and then it's up hot again today. I've been traveling all over this summer. I was, right after I did the Hollywood Fringe Festival, I did a play about Alfred Hitchcock and Mel Brooks when they met for the movie High Anxiety. Right after that, I flew to New York. I was in Buffalo, New York, and I did the Lucille Ball Comedy Festival where I played Fred Mertz. So it's been the summer of old bald white men. It's all I've been doing all summer. So
if there's anyone that needs more representation nowadays, it's the bald white men.
Am I right? It's the Tim Walz talk back.
Do you like constantly being on the go?
I like being occupied. I like having things to do. Much better if they're paying. But, it's because when I'm left to my own devices, I don't organize my time that well. But if I know I'm supposed to be, at this building at this time, and I'm going to be working from this time to this time, I'm good. I'm focused and I'm in the zone. But if you tell me I've got a day off, I may not even plan a leisure activity that I love to do just because I'm like, I don't want to do anything. I'm set where I am.
Well, I'm so excited to learn all about you, Bill. So why don't we start at the very beginning? Where did you grow up and what was growing up like for you?
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and we moved at the age of 3 to Texas. So just to give a little bit of background about my parents, my mother was teaching in a Catholic school, and my dad had just stepped out of the seminary. He was studying to be a Roman Catholic priest. And shortly after that, he was eligible for the draft. So instead of getting drafted, he enlisted in the National Guard in Missouri. And so, and then he got set up on a blind date with my mom. So shortly after that, he started writing for the space program at McDonnell Douglas. And so, fortunately, there weren't a lot of like upward mobility jobs in Missouri at the time, but to write for the space program was something. So he did that for a while, and then he started writing for Shell Oil, which moved us to Houston. And so we lived in Texas for a little while. Then we moved back to St. Louis, to Ferguson, Missouri. Not Ferguson, no, Fenton, Missouri. And then we moved to Michigan, right outside of Detroit on 9 Mile Road, and then Sterling Heights, Michigan, then back to St. Louis and Baldwin. And then we moved to northeastern Pennsylvania, not far from Scranton, where The Office is set, the TV show The Office, and then back to St. Louis. And then I started high school. So I moved around a lot in my youth. And it was my older sister, Mary, and my younger brother, Tim. So the three of us got extra tight because it's tough making friends when, like, real deep, close friends, when every year it's a brand new school, and sometimes twice in the same year.
I've had the opportunity to speak to other people who, like you, moved around a lot, and it could be difficult. How did you feel like you managed to sort of have that chameleon-like ability to adapt every time you moved around?
I'm not sure if I did. I was kind of I felt myself, as I go back and try to remember, kind of a lonely kid. As I got older, a little bit older, like into my preteens and stuff like that, it was magic that kind of introduced me to other kids. And then as I started performing in plays, which might have been around the 5th or 6th grade, I was more, I was putting myself out there, and I was living my truth, for lack of a better phrase. But so like the first time, I forgot that magic is a component of this podcast until I just looked up at my screen here as we're recording. Oh, that's right. You do magic too. I started doing magic when I was like 5 years old. I got a cup and balls set from Adams, I think it was, in this ghost town, like a Wild West ghost town. They had a magic shop, and I went in there and I was like mesmerized. And then when I started doing the tricks for my grandfathers, they started sharing. They had done some magic in their time too. And so they both of my grandfathers on both sides started showing me tricks here and there. And then, and that really helped me reach out, I think, more, if anything, that helped me focus on other people, which is, I have an improv school called the Improv Trick. And I called it that because originally I was going to teach magic as well. But the one similarity between the two is putting the focus on the other person and making it about them. So I think that skill helped me reach out to people more. Not so much that I was a chameleon, but that I think I withdrew. I was quiet until I felt a need or an opportunity to shine. And so that way I felt I kind of like kept out of the way. That's also part of this people pleasing thing that I'm trying to get over, that I'm finding about in therapy. Thank God for therapy. But yeah, I never wanted to make waves. And so until focus was on me, then I would take. Then as soon as the kids found out that I did, an impression of the Big Bopper, or, I could dance like Elvis, and all these are extremely dated things that I'm surprised kids in my generation even knew about. But I picked up pop culture things from my parents' generation and impersonated them.
Do you remember the first public magic shows that you did that was like outside of your family?
Yeah. Well, I warmed up like with friends of my parents when they'd have them over for dinner, and they go, "Oh, Billy, go get that trick that you did last week," and then I'd come and do that. But that was technically outside of my family, but that was still in the comfort of my home. But I think I was in the 4th grade, and I did a show and tell, and I did 3 or 4 tricks that were inside of a magic kit that I had gotten for my birthday. And I was really happy to do that. And so from that point forward, anytime there was a talent show or show and tell, I was like, oh, I got this covered. I know what I'm going to do.
Did you anticipate magic to be the thing that you wanted to do with your life?
I think there was a part of my life in which I did. Doug Henning was really big at the time. and David Copperfield was coming up. And then of course, by the time I was in high school or junior high, I would see Penn and Teller, and I was like, oh, this is something. Yeah, I could do this. Because in the back of my mind, I thought it was this thing that was only done in the 40s. Because all these magic books were like written in the 40s, it seemed like, and they were always using, like just use a handkerchief like you might have in your pocket, and things like that. And they all seemed so like way back in time. But then I started seeing these contemporaries performing, and I thought, oh, I might really like to do that. And so I was a magic nerd for a long, long time.
What particular type of magic really appealed to you?
I think back then it was cards, just because I loved the whole idea of cards and gambling and con men and stuff like that. And even though I guess we do a few card tricks in the show that I do now. I perform with Dave Cox, who's much more of a magician than myself, in a 2-man show called The Charlatans at the Magic Castle. And it's all about con men and conning the audience and conning one another, and we want to lean more into that with our next show. But I think the whole idea of like riverboat gamblers and con men at train stations and things like that. And also, I forgot about Harry Anderson, who kind of leaned into that like 1940s aesthetic with the hat and the suspenders and all that stuff. So.
Well, for me, magic was definitely the catapult that made me want to become a performer. Was that your same experience?
Yeah, my first performances were doing magic. Of course, I did some impressions too. I would warm up the crowd with a couple of impressions of people that I had never heard, really, like James Cagney. I had never seen a James Cagney film, but I saw Rich Little do impressions of him. And then I would see somebody else do an impression. I was like, okay, that must be what they sound like. And then I do that. But yeah, the real meat of the performance was magic. And all my early performances were magic. And I think that led me to the confidence that I could perform in front of a crowd and command attention from a crowd and actually work improvisationally. Because, there's a large component to magic, the what can go wrong. And also, when we're counting on things to turn out either one way or another, we're prepared for both sets of circumstances. So I think it led to me wanting to do improv as well, because I knew I had the ability to deal with what happens when things go wrong, and things really went wrong. One time, my cousin was doing a talent show for a friend's birthday, and she was very talented herself. But she wanted to be my assistant in a magic act. So she asked me to do the magic act. And so to have an assistant, I had to start coming up with tricks that needed more than one person to do them. And I didn't rehearse them well enough, and I didn't rehearse them with her well enough. And it was all on me, and it was kind of a mini disaster, but I got through it. And then I realized if that's the worst as it gets, I can get through performances that go wrong and still come out looking relatively good.
I think that's definitely a common thing, not just in magic, but especially in improv and whatever type of show you want to do. Every now and then you're going to have bad shows. And it doesn't mean it's your fault. It doesn't even mean that you suck at it. It's just one of those things that you kind of have to endure. Would you agree? Absolutely.
You're not going to have great shows unless you have some really, really bad shows along the way. I was talking about that show that Dave Cox and I do, the Charlatans. We almost never have a bad show. There are shows where we know that it's not getting all the laughs that it could get, or that we may have flashed. In other words, somebody might have seen something that we were doing, a setup or whatever, magic setup. But the audience still comes up to us and tells us, oh, that was the greatest thing ever. And so we even are able to fine tune it in that way. But the first time we ever put it up, it involves a lot of audience interaction. So we thought a natural would be to put it up at Improv Olympic, where we were both doing improv at the time. And there were very few people in the audience, and we hadn't really performed any of these tricks in front. We had rehearsed it a lot, but we hadn't performed it in front of an audience. And from all the things that went wrong, it helped us to a stellar debut at the castle by the time we were ready to perform it there. So I think, You have to bomb. And when people like, I've done some stand up, and I really am not the world's best stand up coach. I think if people are looking for a stand up coach, they can go to Tom Clark or somebody like that who's really good. But when people, some of my improv students say, "Hey, I decided tomorrow I'm going to do an open mic. What should I do?" I tell them, well, plan on bombing, record it, and how you recover from the bombing is going to be some really funny stuff. So that's why you want to record it, because you're not going to remember it in the moment what you did to win them back. So start remembering that is what I tell them. So go up there with and have something to close on. I tell them too, but get ready to bomb and then have something to close on. And if the closing doesn't work well, just step off and say, thanks, that's my time, for the very first time. If that's the very first time you're ever doing stand-up, that's what I tell them. So but that goes for magic, that goes for improv, that goes for music, it goes for anything. You are not going to get better until you have a lot of time to fail at it.
Do you think bombing is the same thing as failing?
Well, it depends on what context you're talking about in, but no, not necessarily. Because bombing is still succeeding to a certain point, because as long as you don't give up. I think that's probably the delineation between the two. If you bomb and then you give up and never do it anymore, then that's failing. But you're never going to succeed unless you bomb. So I think bombing is a component of success. The audiences sometimes might perceive bombing as failure, but I think most comics, when they see you bomb, come up and say, hey, here's what I was thinking I might do, and they come up with they'll whisper in their ear or give them a new button on something, a new way to end a joke. So yeah, I don't think that bombing is failure unless you give up afterwards.
I see. What or who would you say were your early influences?
Early influences in terms of comedy and improv, definitely John Candy, Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Lily Tomlin. I think those were all my biggest influences in terms of comedy. In terms of magic, definitely Harry Anderson. I even did his Needle Through the Arm in college for a talent show, because I had seen him do it on Saturday Night Live, and then I saw it available in a magic store. I was like, no way. And it really grossed a lot of the young women out. But they actually came to me, oh, are you all right? Did you hurt yourself? And I didn't have enough. I know you said that that there's no restriction on content, but just so I'm not ruining anything for anybody, if anybody doesn't want a magic spoiler, plug your ears. I didn't have enough rubber cement remover, and so it looked like I had really ripped my arm up when I was able to get it out, and I tried to. So my arm looked red. Some of the blood was sticking to the rubber cement, so I didn't have enough remover, and so it really looked horrific. And people thought I really damaged myself just for a college talent show pep rally, which wasn't the case. I would never do that.
But boy, did you look cool after that.
You bet. So, yeah, I think Harry Anderson and Penn and Teller were two of my biggest influences in magic, for sure.
So you mentioned that you eventually gravitated towards improv. For you, what was the appeal of improv?
I liked that I could do a bunch of different characters, because I do love doing voices. Ever since I was a kid, I would do impersonations. I would do voices. I would make fun of teachers and how they talked. In that same talent show that I did, the Needle Through the Arm, I also did an impression of our religion professor, who is now a retired Episcopalian bishop, and is still in contact with, and a good friend, Stephen Miller. But so I would always do impressions and voices, and I thought that was a venue to do more than just one character, because I don't like to stay tied down to one character, or even to play a character that's too close to myself. I've never found much enjoyment in that. I do know that that's the biggest dramatic challenge, is to play characters that are close to yourself and stay real to that, which I can do, but I don't get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
It's funny when you talk about how you love doing impressions. And I actually was thinking about this earlier today. I feel like a lot of people now, when they do impressions of someone, they don't really do an impression of them. They do an impression of someone else impersonating them. Like
Yeah,
when you think of like best example I can think of, when you think of Arnold Schwarzenegger, I don't think when people do an impression of him, they're impersonating Arnold. I think they're impersonating Dana Carvey or Conan O'Brien or
yeah,
Rob Smigel doing Arnold. Would you agree?
that's true. And I think that's part of why you see people doing the same 3 or 4 impressions. Like everybody's got a Christopher Walken, everybody's got a um, oh, why am I forgetting Owen Wilson? They just go, oh wow, and it's like, oh great, you're an impressionist, and usually they can do it for like one word or two, and they think that they're the best. And now everybody thinks they do a great Trump impression, and it's like, no, you do a good impression of whoever you just saw. Do an impression of that person. It usually doesn't sound like them, but they keep using the catchphrases. And that was one thing I learned. I started one of my first professional jobs in comedy was working with Dana Carvey, and he would always talk about you got to find the hook, and the hook is often a phrase that they say or a certain mannerism that they do. You always want to find out what that is and then do it often and find ways to do it. And if they have a speech impediment or a word they pronounce a certain word, put that word or that sound into more of the dialogue so you have more of an opportunity to do it. So find the hooks and use them. And so now I think a lot of people have seen the people do the hooks, and so they do the same hook. And I've seen some people who are really popular on Instagram and TikTok who are impressionists, and they're really just doing the hooks. They don't sound very much like them. There are others who are really, really good. And the ones that are really good, it's because their voice is already in that same range as the person. So they happen to have the same tone of voice. Like there's two guys, Matt Friend and Justin Ruppel, who do like a great Howard Stern, and it's because their voices are in that range already. So then they just have to do a little bit of the New York dialect, and then the emphasis that Stern puts on certain words and things like that. And it's effortless for them. They're so great. But yeah, there's not a lot of great impressionists. There's a lot of people now who consider themselves impressionists, but they're not very good at doing impressions.
Yeah. Do you think the fact that everyone just parodies the parody, do you think that that kind of diminishes the art form of impersonation a bit?
I think to a certain extent it does, because well, it's just like if you teach like people, the magic, it's not really a trick in and of itself, but the D light, the little thumb tip that has like a little light in the inside of it.
I
And you
had
see,
those.
yeah, you see people playing around with those on TikTok or at home or drunks at a party, and you're like, oh well, look at that. That's something that could have been really mystical in the right hands. I used to use it as a setup to a floating match. I would make it like I was grabbing part of somebody's aura from them and holding on to it, and that part would mystify them before I even got to the actual trick. But then it lost some of its luster once every drunk in the world would do it. So in a sense, yeah, I think it cheapens a little bit what's being done. But you don't want to be a gatekeeper for technique or you know whatever one might use to get the desired effect. So yeah, it cheapens it, but do I want to stop people from doing it? No, because at least it keeps things alive as an art form, both impressions and magic and improv. There's a lot of stock tricks in improv that people use all the time.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah,
In 1992, what made you decide to move to Chicago?
I was working as a bank teller, and at nights, almost every night, doing comedy with a troupe called the Network. And I started working with them while I was in college. On Christmas break and summer break, I would go to practice with them and learn improv from them, and even started writing some sketches. And then we did one show at my college, Central Methodist University, the year that I graduated in the spring. And then the week that I graduated, they were they got a last minute replacement for the headliner who was sick. They got cast as the headliner at Catch a Rising Star Comedy Club, which was an A club. It had just opened in St. Louis, and so they was bringing in some of the best acts nationally, even better than the Funny Bone, which had been there since I was in high school and able to go to comedy clubs. So I was beating out even my wildest dreams by graduating into headlining at an A club in one of the hottest venues in St. Louis at the time. And so, but I did that for a year, and a talent coordinator there, my good friend Todd Grove, who later went on to be the producer for Defending the Caveman, Rob Becker's show on Broadway. Todd was like, man, you need to go to Chicago. He had spent some time studying in Chicago before he started going into production. He was like, you really need to go there. And it's what I wanted to do anyway. It's what I wanted to do before I went to college. I told my dad I wanted to go to study at Second City. He was like, no, you have to get a college education. All those people are very smart. You're not going to understand any of the references they're making to literature or history or philosophy. You really need to go out there and do that. I was like, oh, okay. So I did that. And so I wanted to do it anyway, but the allure of being able to do it right there and already, we were making appearances on local TV and radio shows, which is something I didn't do for my, the next 4 years in Chicago. So I felt I was already doing what I wanted to do there, but I realized there wasn't a lot of chance for exposure. I didn't have an agent to start working in film or television at all. So I realized that if I really wanted to do this for a living and really wanted to, which was my goal, to be on Saturday Night Live, I needed to go to Chicago and start studying and start getting more exposure, more experience, and hopefully get an agent. So I moved to Chicago. So at that point, there was no internet. So I had to go to a magazine, what would they call it?
A library?
A newsstand.
Oh,
I could have gone to a library too, but I went to a newsstand and got a copy of the Chicago Tribune Sunday edition of all the job listings. And so I started looking for jobs that I was qualified for. And the one I was most qualified for was as a bank teller. So I applied and wound up working in the lobby of the Wrigley Building in Boulevard Bank as a bank teller. And that's what allowed me to afford living in Chicago while I started studying at Second City.
What was the experience like when you were studying at Second City?
I didn't know what to expect. And my first audition, I didn't realize that I had learned to improvise. We were talking about, improv tricks and stuff like that, and like the little things that people pull up their sleeve that aren't really improv. I was doing a lot of that in that audition. So I was getting laughs, but it wasn't the sort of laughs that they wanted to have you put in use in Chicago. So I wound up, instead of getting into the conservatory, getting into a class called Improv for Actors. Fortunately, it was taught by Stephen Colbert. So I think I wound up where I needed to be. And I later got a chance to work with him on the Dana Carvey show. But so in that class, I also met one of my best friends for life, Rich Tallarico, who later went on to write for Saturday Night Live, Mad TV, Key and Peele. Now he's running for the board of the Writers Guild. So I think just like everything else in improv, you fail upwards. And so what happened was supposed to happen. And in terms of what was going to happen, I didn't know. First of all, I didn't know that I'd wind up because I never had that experience growing up until I went to high school, really, of studying with the same group of people and being around the same group of people for more than 1 year. I didn't realize, these people are going to be in my life, some of them forever. And, a lot of those people from that class or from the class that we eventually all got compiled into, I'm still in touch to this day as a 55-year-old man, still in touch with my friends on Facebook and still very close to those people. My good friend Yvonne Landry, who later went on to start La Nuit Theater in New Orleans, and then she started the Superhero Training Center in Georgia. We're still good friends too. So I wasn't expecting lifelong friendships out of it either.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this question. What was Stephen Colbert like as a teacher?
He was great. He was very, very energetic about it. Um, very responsive. He cared about us. There weren't a lot of teachers that would go out after class and have like a drink with you, but there were a couple times where he went over to the last act, which was the bar across the street from Second City, to have a drink with us and just talk about what's it like, answer questions. What's it like working in Second City? When I do this in class, is this wrong or whatever? So he really did care. And Rich, who I was telling you about earlier, he and I would go and see. You can get free tickets to Second City shows when you're in the training center. At least you could then. So we would go and see it 3 or 4 nights a week. And we had the shows memorized. If they ever needed extra understudies, we could have stepped in at that point and done it. And that actually paid off later when I was a host at Second City and got kind of tapped to come in and do a show. It was because I was used to absorbing those shows from the audience. But anyway, Colbert would look out at us and see us in the audience and be like, "What the hell? You guys are still here?" And so he would do little inside jokes, use one of our classmates' names on stage in a sketch, and things like that. So he was really supportive. He was really, he was a great teacher and a great person. Always has been. Very down to earth.
While you were studying and training at Second City, do you recall any particular lessons or tips that really resonated with you?
Oh, for sure. Martin DeMott would always say, when you're, as soon as you walk through those doors, you are an artist. Because, you kind of doubt yourself a lot of times along the way. And he had a great way of kind of short circuiting the imposter syndrome right away, so that nobody felt like they didn't belong. And that was great. He was one of my earlier teachers. Michael Gelman always taught me to always find something new in a scene, just even if it's you're imagining a piece of lint on your clothing and brushing it away, whatever. Always don't do the same scene if you're doing a sketch or something like that. Or even if you're re-improvising a scene you improvised before, always find something new. Always be looking for something that makes it new and interesting and exciting for you. Don DePolo used to always say, start things in the middle. Don't if you're doing a scene that's a parody of the war genre, don't be, just getting the orders to ship out. Be in the trenches, getting ready to jump out. Make it about the action.
Did you find yourself having that bit of imposter syndrome when you got there?
I don't think so, really. I always had, I think my ego kind of got in the way sometimes. In terms of, I was like, I've been doing this for a year on a professional level, and some of these people are just learning how to do this now, So I probably almost had too much confidence at times. And then one of the things that my friend Ali Faranakian, who later went on and started the People's Improv Theater in New York, and has done so many, wrote on Saturday Night Live and has done so many wonderful things. Ali pointed out to me one time, it was the 35th anniversary of Second City. And so they were remounting some classic sketches and starting a brand new review, but out of best of scenes. And so they were having everybody experience some of these best of scenes that everybody had done. And I can't even remember what the scene was, but it was a classic scene that everybody had toured at that point. And so they, a lot of people felt like our time was being wasted because it's hey, we wanted to get a chance to, to do an improv scene with Avery Schreiber or whatever, and, explore these things this other way. And here we are in one of these workshops where we have to remount a scene that everybody already does and has already toured and has already put on stage. And I did the scene and I realized it was killing, but it didn't even occur to me. And Ali pulled me aside afterwards. He goes, "You realize what you just did, didn't you?" I was like, "What?" And he goes, "You just killed in a room full of some of the funniest people on the planet in a sketch that they already know inside and out." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess I did." Sometimes I took for granted, and of course everybody in there had the ability to do that. They were all great, but some of them were just coming at it from the mindset of, we got to do Pictionary again or whatever, which is a great scene, but people don't want to do the same scene over and over again that they're already touring. So I think that was part of it. I was always, I was never jaded. And I think some of the people who had been in Chicago a little bit longer than me were already a little bit more jaded than I was. And I was still like, oh, I get to do this. Oh, and I get to do that. So, yeah, I never felt that the imposter syndrome. I kind of took the level of talent that I have slightly for granted, just because I was surrounded by so many amazingly talented people. I didn't feel imposter syndrome, but I also wasn't aware of my own skills and my own value at the time, just because I was surrounded by so many people like that. So fortunately, I didn't suffer enough. Where I suffered from imposter syndrome was when it came to more so doing long form, because I really didn't have that much training in long form and in writing sketch comedy. And especially because my first big writing job was, the Dana Carvey show. And, the writing staff of that show, Robert Smigel, Louis C.K., John Glazer, the Murderers Row, all these amazing writers and producers. You guys have gone on to be producers and exec producers, Robert Carlock, and that was where imposter syndrome really kicked in. I was like, I don't belong here as a writer. I probably did, but I felt that I didn't.
You mentioned something that I'm kind of interested in. After doing this for such a long period of time and after doing all those touring shows, how do you keep yourself from getting jaded?
That's a tough question, because I think eventually everybody gets jaded. The more they're exposed to the same thing over and over again. I've gotten jaded about a lot of things, I think, over time. Like at this point, there's one point in my life where there's a show and I can be in it. I'm there. Sign me up. 3 shows in a row. I'll do all 3. At this point, I've been in so many shows where somebody will say like, oh, do you want to be in an 11 o'clock show? And it's a great cast of people. And I'd be like, 11 o'clock? No, so is that jaded, or is that just like I've learned to insulate myself from things that are draining me? I don't know. Am I jaded about auditions? Definitely. I think if I were less jaded, I would do better. But sometimes I either under prepare because I'm like, I got this, I got this, or I'll over prepare because I'm like, oh, I really don't know if I'm the right person for this, so I really gotta make sure I got this nailed, and maybe that's hurting me because I feel I'm too secure and I'm not loose enough. So I think when it comes to auditions, I'm definitely jaded. And time slots for performing. Those are the things that I'm most jaded about. And outside of the performance realm, romantic relationships. There was a point in my life in which I was like, there's only one. You just got to find that one person out there for you. I'm like, nah, there's more than one. Doesn't mean that I don't believe in love, but what I do believe is that there's more than one person out there for you. And instead of like putting all your eggs in one basket, just realize there's a lot of people to explore and a lot of types of relationships to explore, and they're all out there.
I think everyone gets jaded when it comes to auditioning. I mean, I know I certainly got jaded with that after a while. And every actor that I talk to uniformly says the one thing I would love to get rid of is the audition process, because man, is that a brutal thing.
Yeah. And there was actually, they really paid attention to that fact when we did the auditions for the Dana Carvey show. And I think it was because Dana was like, he had heard a bunch of people say this. And I know a couple people gave them an earful when they were just asking them about the audition process. I'm not the sort of person that like spills all my private thoughts in an audition. But the thing was, a lot of these people who were auditioning for the Dana Carvey show had come up through Chicago around like Robert Smigel, around the time that he was doing things, or were good friends with people that he was already working with. So when they were talking, they would say, here's my problem with the audition process. And the one big problem that everybody had was the thing that they're judging you for is your big final audition where you're in front of 3 or 4 people who are there not to laugh. and they're judging how well you can surf waves of laughter because you're working in front of a live audience. Well, can you bring it? And if you can 100% bring it every time, does that mean you're a hack and you've got this material that'll kill that way? But, who knows what'll happen? And so what they did was they did a live performance. They had all the producers for the show and a lot of the networks and, people's agents and stuff like that. And then also people's family. And we performed at a bought house at Igby's Comedy Club, which doesn't exist anymore here. And we went in and performed in front of a live audience. And so they can get a sense of, can this person command an audience? Can they keep a laugh coming? Do they know how to elevate a moment that they find there on stage? And that really changed everything. So I think there are certain things they can eliminate about the audition process. And I'll tell you, this is the thing that I enjoy the most, not for comedy per se, but for definitely for dramatic auditions, is the self-tapes. At first I hated them, but once it became the only way to do them, and it's like, okay, well, now I have to take this on and I'll do it, especially during the pandemic, it was like, well, there's no other option. So if I'm going to work and there's work available, I'll do this. Is that you could do way more takes than you had the opportunity to do before. And you're reading with somebody, hopefully, that you already know, and you know the rhythms that they're reading you with. And so when you go in for an audition and you're doing it yourself and it's a self-tape, you know who you're reading with, you know how they're going to read it, you know what your eye lines are going to be, and it's a wonderful thing. So I think that's caused me to get a little less jaded about auditions to that extent. But still, I either over or under prepare because I am jaded about either how long I've been doing this or how underprepared I think I am for something.
Well, I definitely enjoyed the Dana Carvey show. And I love the sketches that you guys performed. And of course, Dana obviously got most of the attention. What was that experience like working on the Dana Carvey show?
It was a dream come true in certain ways. And in other ways, it was hell. And I'll go into the dream come true first, and then I'll get into the hell. The dream come true was, I had, since I was a kid, wanted to be on Saturday Night Live. That's why I did almost everything I did in my life. That's why I moved to Chicago. And then I auditioned for Saturday Night Live and didn't get it. And there's if you want to hear the story about that, there's a documentary called Too Funny to Fail about the Dana Carvey show on Hulu. And it explains my audition for Saturday Night Live. But it was because I didn't get Saturday Night Live that I got the Dana Carvey show. And here I was performing on a show with Dana Carvey, who my freshman year of college, I had a poster of the church lady on my wall. Other guys had like women on a sports car or their favorite, celebrity, their favorite basketball player or something on the wall. Me, I had the church lady on my poster on my wall.
Hopefully not on a sports car.
Should have been. That would have been the greatest height of, if I would have realized how much of a nerd I was, I would have done that. But so here I was, actually meeting him to audition and then performing on a show with him. And we weren't in that many sketches together, unfortunately. I remember the first sketch that we did together was together. Like we were like portions of a sketch together. But when we did the Mountain Dew sketch,
I love that sketch
Liquid
so
Sunshine.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But we first sat down at the table and he goes, "Here we are, Bill, finally, mano a mano." And I was like, oh, that's right. Because just being around him was enough of a thrill. So in that sense, it was like a kid's dream come true. Now, the way it was hell, and I didn't even realize that it was just part of a process until I read Gasping for Airtime by Jay Moore. And then, of course, once I started listening to Dana's podcast about the process for Saturday Night Live, because so many people involved in the Dana Carvey show had come from Saturday Night Live, that was the mindset. Was, okay, well, we throw people in without really talking to them or telling them anything. My first day at work, mind you, I used to work at a bank, so I would go to work at 6 a.m. I'd have to go there, balance my drawer, get ready, and so I realized that I wasn't working in banking, but I showed up for my first day of work at the Dana Carvey show, and I lived right around the block. I found a studio apartment like 2 blocks away on 55th, and we were shooting on 57th. So I walked 2 blocks. I was probably up at 6 a.m. so that I was awake and ready to go for my first day of work. And I got to the office, and it was locked. So I was there waiting in the place between the front doors and the actual office doors to get into the office. And I was like, am I late? Did I miss something? Did work not start today? What's going on? And then people started arriving, and then I had coffee, and I sat there, and it wasn't until 10 o'clock that some of the writers started rolling in. And there were already cliques, and I felt like I didn't kind of belong in those cliques. And we weren't given assignments. I thought they'd give an assignment. They say, okay, hey, we need 1 2-person sketch and 2 3-person sketches, or listen, we need a sketch for the church lady. We need 3 sketches. Who go with the best 3 sketches for church lady? So I thought that would be part of the process or something, but no. It was just all of a sudden they were like, okay, table read. And I would be like, I didn't submit anything. I didn't know I had to submit. What's going on here? And then I would submit things. And then Louis C.K. was like, hey, we haven't gotten a lot of submissions from you. What's going on? I was like, well, I'm just not sure if some of the sketches that I've written are, what the show is looking for. Like I had done a sketch about St. Thomas Aquinas, the theologian. And I'm like, we're doing sketches about Madani, a guy who's a male Madonna. I'm not sure if that's what ABC and this show is looking for. And then I didn't realize also that, if somebody has a character that they've developed already, you don't write for that character unless you're asked to, jump on that. So I was lost in the process. I didn't know what the process was. And as a result, I was in less sketches, I think, than most people. And I didn't realize that people were writing for themselves, too. I was like, I just need to write, right? No, you need to write sketches that feature yourself or you're not going to be in as much. And I wasn't. And so, there was one episode that I wasn't even in, really. I was in 1 pre-taped sketch. And sadly, that was the week that I decided to stay on and stay in town, even though my grandfather had passed away. I decided not to go home for his funeral because I was working on a television show. And I was like, well, if I go away, I don't know. I didn't even know if you could get personal time off if your parent died, or a grandparent died. It was the first time a grandparent of mine had died. I didn't know that the world kind of goes, oh, you poor thing, and lets you do anything when a relative dies, for the most part, unless you're a doctor yourself and somebody needs your life-saving skills. I probably could have gone home and been with my family for that. And then I grew to regret that even more too. And then the way in which the show ended, we weren't informed. We weren't told, hey guys, we're not having you back. They didn't even really inform us other than internally, people from the show told us that, oh, they're not going to air that final episode. We're all going to get together and watch it in a bar somewhere. Oh, really? Okay. And then the scuttlebutt at the time was, well, it looks like Lorne Michaels is going to pick up the show and put it on NBC. And so I was waiting for that to maybe happen. And it wasn't until, and we weren't even sure if that we were canceled, Could it be that we were just on hiatus or whatever? That was the first time I really understood the concept of hiatus. It could mean you're not hired or fired. It could mean anything. So I had to find out through walking through the streets of New York and seeing it on, not the front page of a newspaper, but maybe, a newspaper somewhere. I was like, oh, great. This is how I find out I'm kind of fired and I'm out of work and I don't have a job. That was weird. And then it was a joyous occasion when they started running the Ambiguously Gay Duo on Saturday Night Live, but that was very unceremonious too. I freaked out. I was wonderfully overjoyed when it happened because I was making popcorn in my kitchen and all of a sudden I heard my own voice on Saturday Night Live saying, this week's episode, it takes 2 to tango. I was like, what? I'm on. Nobody told me this. So I was underwhelmed with the amount of information. What's the word? What am I trying to say? I was amazed that there's so much information they don't give you, positive and negative, when you're doing a show like that.
Well, going through that hell of the Dana Carvey show, did that have sort of a hardening effect on you, or sort of like a toughening up effect on you?
I'm not sure that it did. I think it lowered my expectations for the industry. I thought that things were off and running for me, that as soon as I got the Dana Carvey show that my career had begun, which in a certain way it had. I was signed by William Morris. I had a manager. I was auditioning for top parts in movies, but I thought that would go on until the next big gig. And it was a long time before I got my next film role, and even then, it was a smaller role. It was, the fan number one in Galaxy Quest, and a lot of people remember that role because, fortunately, it's a memorable scene, and it was used in the trailer and the commercials and everything for it. But it was a small role, and I went from being one of the leads on this, national comedy show to I hope I get a job again someday. So it lowered my expectations, if nothing else. I don't know if hardened me because I'm still. Well, I guess in the last 10 years or so, I'm a lot less devastated when I don't get a part I really really wanted. Uh,
Well, but this is, of course, the ongoing story for all actors. It's the tough reality that you could get booked for a gig and it may take you somewhere, then all of a sudden that ends, and then there's a struggle of trying to find something else. Do you think that's a tough thing for actors, especially nowadays, to kind of comprehend? Since we live in a world now where you snap one thing and you become famous because of likes and followers.
um, yeah, because fame is a different thing now, and like I think people always thought that um, Warhol was over exaggerating when he said, "Well, one day everybody will be famous for 15 minutes." We're in a world where that does happen now, and it can be anybody. It could be somebody who doesn't know and isn't looking for fame. They got pranked, or they were the victim of a tragedy, or whatever, and then they're truly famous, world famous, internationally famous, and it might only be for 15 minutes, and then they're on to Honey Boo Boo, or they're on to somebody who survived an earthquake or didn't survive
How did you become Mr. Laritate?
one. I I wasn't sure. I was at another point in my life where I wasn't sure that I was going to be um, really working in entertainment anymore. I had married my first wife, and she hated LA, and she wanted to move back to St. Louis, or at least on camera. I wasn't sure if I'd be working on camera again. At that point, I had already done the first two seasons of Curious George, the animated series, and I had been the lead in a pilot for a Nickelodeon show called Diggs Tailwagger. And so we bought a house back in St. Louis because it's so much easier to buy a house on LA actor money back in Missouri than it is to buy one here. But I thought I would still be able to, fly back and forth and then continue to get residuals, from, at the very least for that show for a good long amount of time. And then it was, kind of we were just moving back because it was the writer's strike that was happening in 2006. So we're like, oh, maybe it'll just be for a short amount of time and we'll save some money and build some equity in this house. And then maybe we'll be able to start renting out this house. And then, and that money will pay our monthly rent on an apartment or a condo or something back in LA. Who knew? But I had an arrangement with my manager and my agent at the time that I would submit. This is before a lot of people were doing self tapes, but it was still starting to happen. Would you submit for auditions if when they come up? And so I had submitted for a movie called All About Steve with Sandra Bullock, and the director loved me for it. And so I had to fly out to meet with the director and potentially to work in that movie. Well, I didn't get that, but while I was flying out there, I got a request from my agent. Would you, we want you to read for this show. This is a Disney show. They made a pilot called the Marvelous O'Malley's or whatever, the Amazing O'Malley's. And I was like, what is it? It's called Wizards of Waverly Place. I was like, a wizard thing. And I'm not a fan of where Harry Potter. I'm even less so now because of J.K. Rowling's idiotic ramblings. But I was like, a wizard show, and then I had just found out that my cousin had died, and I was depressed from that. I was busy trying to study for this big audition, and I was like, I'm not going to do it. And they're like, please, you're going to be in town. I was like, it's a guest spot on a Disney show, and you're talking about the lead to a motion picture, and you're wanting me to prioritize that. And they were like, not prioritize it, but just be there, show up. And I was like, okay. And as could have been anticipated, by the time I flew in, rented the car, and drove across town for this Disney audition, I was like an hour and a half late. And I called my agent and I was like, should I even bother going in? They said, they're still waiting for you. I walked in, read the part. I was not memorized because all I had promised is that I would be there. I didn't promise that I was going to be practiced, memorized, rehearsed, or anything. And before I walked off the lot, they called me and they said they want to check your availability, so you're on hold. I was like, what? I had no idea. They told me later that it was I was the quickest somebody had ever been hired for a Disney Channel show at the time.
Wow.
So that's how I got it. And then I had originally planned to go on a trip to Germany with my wife at the time, and she was like, what am I going to tell my dad? And I said, tell him his son-in-law is working. It's much better than me struggling trying to start up an improv school in St. Louis. I'm working again, and I got to be there for this. So, and I had a feeling, it was only a guest star, but I had a feeling that it was going to be a recurring spot because the character's name was Laritate, and that was the boss on Bewitched. And so it seemed like I was going to be the regular person who they were going to have to keep the magic from. And I was like, oh yeah, I think I'm going to be back on this. And sure enough, I was. And that was actually the show that allowed me to move back here eventually, because I'd be back every couple of weeks shooting another episode. And I was like, I think it makes more sense that I move back.
Well, the show was really popular on the Disney Channel. And of course, you had some great moments where you connected with Selena Gomez's character. How was the camaraderie between the two of you?
I love working with her. I would love to work with her again. But we got along really well. And she never had any sort of ego. She had every right to have an ego. And you know how you've heard so many of those stories about the Disney kids and how they get. Well, fortunately, none of the kids on that show suffered from an ego, at least never that I ever experienced amongst themselves or with any of the other cast members or anything. She was always down to earth. It was easy for us to create that chemistry in those scenes. It was effortless. The relationship that you see her having with Larry Tate in those scenes is how we related to one another. Maybe a little less contemptuous, because I wasn't her principal or anything like that. But, and she would, one time when she was dating Nick Jonas, she asked my advice about, what should I get him? He's a guy who has everything. What should I get him for Christmas? And I said, go to Color Me Mine and make him something, because nobody has something made by Selena Gomez. And she was like, oh, well, that's a good idea. I don't know if she actually did that. I never went and asked her, did you take my guy advice? But I definitely, she definitely trusted me enough to have conversations with me about her personal life. And for a young woman that age to actually open up to like a guy in his late 30s about her dating life, it says a lot about how candid she was and how much she trusted me. So I miss working with her. I miss seeing her. I would love to work with her again.
With all the great experiences that you've had on TV and film, how do you feel like the training that you've gotten in improv really helped prepare you for these other roles?
Definitely helped prepare me for everything that I've done, but in particular, I could speak to like Wizards of Waverly Place and The Ringer. In Wizards of Waverly Place, they would have episodes where they didn't mention the cowboy stuff that much in a sketch. And so I would you never want to improvise at a table read. So I would never improvise at the table read, because then, you want the writer's material to have a chance to soar in front of the networks and in front of their boss and everything. But I would improvise during the rehearsals and camera blocking and stuff like that. And I'd see it in the script the next day. I was like, oh, they liked it. And Peter Murrieta was the exec producer for the show. And he had an improv background. So he was always very supportive of things. And he was always great with, when we were on set, after we had shot our first version of a setup, to say like, okay, I'll try it with this line, And it was just like improv. We would say something a different way, or he said like, say something about the color red and then go with it, and he trusted us enough to go out there and improvise with that. And I think that was partially why almost all of the guest stars that you saw on the show were people with improv backgrounds. You could look at their improv pedigrees every time you saw a guest star on Wizards. It was because it was somebody that Peter knew or trusted, or he could see on their resume, oh, this person knows improv, we'll bring him in. So that's how it really helped on that major role. And The Ringer, things got changed up because, they hired 4 of us who did not actually have an intellectual disability. The movie was about Special Olympics and people with intellectual disabilities, because the studio wasn't sure that a bunch of people with intellectual disabilities could carry a film. Now, obviously, it's been proven that that's not a difficulty, and it makes it more authentic. But so they once that started to become obvious to everybody on set, they asked some of us if we would be okay with distributing some of our lines to the other Special Olympians, and all of us were like, yeah, absolutely, it only makes sense. But that kind of like cut down stage time, screen time, for a lot of us. So improv kind of brought us back into the picture by, there's a lot of lines that I improvised when we were doing script reads or on set. And we were told all along, don't hold back, improvise. And one of the most famous lines in that movie that Jeffrey Arend says is, when the fuck did we get ice cream? That's the line everybody remembers from the movie The Ringer. And that was kind of improvised. It wasn't written. It wasn't in the script. It was a great script by Ricky Blitt, but Jeff decided to improvise that line at the last minute, and Pete Farrelly got really mad, but not because he had improvised it, because people had laughed and ruined the take. We all used improv, what a cod block line, and I'm trying to remember which other of my lines were improvised. Several others. Some of them got cut that I improvised and were funny, but they didn't make it into the final picture. Definitely helped both those projects along, the fact that I had, had comfort in improv, and the fact that I felt comfortable teaching improv, because I wound up teaching improv workshops to the Special Olympians on the set of the movie. We spent a whole Saturday just doing improv and learning improv exercises. And that was because I had not only done improv, but taught improv.
There is a lovely video on your YouTube channel where you are basically teaching kids how to end the R word. And it's a very heartwarming video. And it's great to see how not only do you teach kids to end the R word, but they also get very enthusiastic about, yeah, we don't need to use that. Do you recall that experience and what led to that experience?
Yeah. What happened was when I moved back to Missouri, I got in touch with, I had done some stuff. I had already hosted the Winter Special Olympics out here in California. And I knew that they had it's what's called global ambassadors of Special Olympics. And so I called up the local Missouri Special Olympics in Missouri office and said, hey, I would love to teach an improv workshop for the Global Messengers. The Global Messengers are Special Olympians that go around and talk to legislators and fundraise and stuff like that for Special Olympics on behalf of Special Olympics. And obviously improv helps speaking skills. And so they said, yeah, we'd be up for that. And we even had an improv show where we did it like a competitive style improv show, kind of like comedy sports, where we have like a red team and a blue team and a referee with Special Olympians. And I was the referee. And so they had the idea to tour around Missouri with Christina Campbell of Special Olympics, who is Special Olympian, and because they were just starting that campaign of spread the word to end the R word, and they said, we can't afford a stipend or anything like that, but we'll pay for room and board and meals and travel and everything. And they traveled us around the state, just meeting with schools and talking to kids about trying to treat people with intellectual disabilities with respect and to try to humanize it, because some kids, if they don't have somebody in their life who has an intellectual disability, don't see them as human, unfortunately. So I think it helped to humanize all people through that process.
One of the things that also kind of made me laugh about that video is that you're talking to these kids, getting their reactions, and yet there were like 2 or 3 kids that still went, "I love you, Selena Gomez."
Oh yeah. For some of them, it was all about Selena Gomez, and that's cool. I'm glad they did. I'm glad they enjoyed that. And if you can take the cachet of both Johnny Knoxville and Selena Gomez and make a difference in how some kid looks at the world, I love it.
I love that. I love how you've really put a lot of emphasis in helping people with developmental issues, because I think it's great how we can see improv being applied to other areas other than learning to be a performer. And I think nowadays everyone is definitely seeing how improv can help in so many different areas.
Absolutely. Just like everything else in improv, I always teach my students that, the best thing you can do in an improv scene is have it come full circle. So if you're ever lost, just go back and ask yourself, how did we start? And improv as an art form is doing that. Certainly in this country, it started as therapy, at Hull House. And it wasn't meant to turn these kids into performers, but then it wound up being a performance art form. It became a whole movement. And now that there's an improv school in almost every, or at least an improv team in almost every town in America, it's coming full circle. People are seeing the importance of applied improvisation and using improv to change people's perspectives, to grow their skills, and in a lot of cases, just to make them better communicators.
Well, Bill, here is the last question of the day. What's the one piece of advice that has served you well that you'd want everyone else to hear?
The one piece of advice that has served me well: nothing lasts forever. And that in the darkest of times, if you remember that, things will get better. And it also helps you from flying too high and to disregard people when things are going great for you. You're gonna eventually come back down again. And that thing they always talk about is you meet the same people coming up as on your way up as you do on the way down. And when you do that, you want people to remember the best of you. So if you remember that, hey, we're all going to be back on that same level again, things are all going to be cool, is to remember that nothing is forever, and that it helps the most when you're through your tough times, because it'll get better.
That's definitely a great piece of advice. Well, Bill, I cannot thank you enough for being here on Improv and Magic. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the best in your future, my friend.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Nothing lasts forever. We're all going to be back on the same level again, so don't let it get you down. Always remember that great piece of advice. Thank you very much, Bill Chott, for talking to me today. You're a great source of joy in the world. My friends, be sure to look up this guy and catch him performing. And if you're in the St. Louis or Los Angeles area looking for some great improv classes, visit Bill's institution, the Improv Trick. Find out about their classes and shows at their website, theimprovtrick.weebly.com. Thanks for tuning in, my friends. The holidays are almost here, so to all of you listening, I hope you all have a wonderful, fun, blessed, and happy holidays. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy whatever you celebrate in December, and a very Happy New Year. And if it's not December by the time you hear this, I'm sure there's another holiday coming up to be excited about. I'm LD Madeira, you are who you are, and you are special. See you next time.